Hello, friends out there in video land. Um, my name is Victoria Robbins, and I'm here again today to bring you some trivia. It's going to be about the patriarchs, the first half of Genesis. I didn't realize that there would be that much when I started working on this. So, anyway, starting with Adam and Eve. I prepared some things that perhaps you didn't know. Maybe you do know some of it, but anyway, these are just things that I've discovered in my reading of um, the book of Genesis. So, starting in 3:8, we have our first parents, Adam and Eve, of course. It just seems like everything starts in the garden. And whenever you read the Bible, you always go back to Genesis. So, anyway, they start out in perfect harmony there in the, the Garden of Eden. And it says that they heard the voice of God walking in the cool of the day. And this would be Genesis 3:8. And they heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and Adam and his wife Eve hid themselves from the presence of the Lord. So it seems to me that the Lord wanted to be in relationship with them, and that ended pretty quickly. If they did have it, it wasn't for very long. So, anyway, it's not until Adam's great grandson Enoch that God had someone who walked with him. But back to Adam, um, it doesn't say until Seth, his next son that replaced um, Abel, that it says in Genesis 4:26. Let me turn back to that. And to Seth, and this would be the next son that is recorded, born to Adam and Eve after the death of Abel. It says, and then to Seth was born a son, and he named him Enos. And then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. And I did a little bit of math. It's not my strong suit, but anyway, at the age that Seth was at 105, that would make Adam 235 at this time. And being that Adam lived to be 930 years old, it was a quarter of Adam's life that he did not call on the name of the Lord. So, what was he doing? Anyway, I'd like to submit to you that perhaps that is why in Hebrews 11, which we call the Hebrews Hall of Fame, that Adam is not there. He's omitted. And it starts with Abel. And it says, by faith, Abel. Not by faith, Adam. It's by faith, Abel. And Abel was there. His name means breath, like a vapor. He was there briefly, but nevertheless, he made it all the way in the near the end of the book of the Bible, in Hebrews. And of the different ones that I'm going to speak about today, and I chose 12 patriarchs and their wives. 5 of them made it into Hebrews Hall of Fame. Anyway, the next one I'd like to mention would be Adam's wife, Eve. And for her, I thought a lot about her. She was the first mother. Adam named her. She was, of course, tempted by the snake. And did you notice that the snake did not bother Adam at all until he had a wife? And the devil hates the family, and that's why I think, he in in his stealth went to the woman and tempted her, because Adam sort of abdicated his role as leader, because it says that he was there with her when she saw the fruit, lust of the eyes. She saw that it was good to eat, and she tasted, um, lust of the flesh, and she gives to her husband also, who's there with her, and he doesn't say, "Stop, honey, we're not supposed to be doing this." He just goes right along with her. And that could have been also because he did not want to be separated from her in eternity, because he knew that God said, "In the day that you eat of it, you will surely die." And God wasn't saying that for naught. God meant that. In the day that you eat of it, you will spiritually die. And that's what happened. And unfortunately, they were driven almost like animals out of the Garden of Eden. And I have to think that Eve would have been the first person to shed tears, that if she did not shed tears for being evicted from her home of bliss in the garden where it was perfect conditions, then when her oldest child murdered her next child, she would certainly have had hot tears running down her face. The Bible doesn't tell us, but that's my guess, that it would have been Eve. And something interesting that I don't know if it's of any significance, but I I thought about the name Eve, 3 letters, very simplistic. Um, and if I ask you what is God's perfect number, it's also my favorite number. It is the number 7. And 7 means perfection, fulfillment. And I would like to say that Eve is at the heart of that, because if you add 2 letters to her name, I'm going to add that, add an S, kind of messy there, and an N to the Eve, you have 7. So Eve is at the heart of all the perfection, not in human terms, but in God's terms, because we have um, that spoken of in the very first verse of prophecy of Christ, and that would be in 3:15, Genesis 3:15, where it says, "I will put enmity between thee," speaking to the snake, "and the woman, Eve, and between thy seed and her seed. It will bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." So the woman is in the middle of it all. And we certainly know that from Mary in the New Testament when she bears the Christ child. So, anyway, I would like to think that Eve was the very first person to shed tears, and she's in the heart of all of it. Anyway, Adam named her Eve. She was the mother of all living. And next, I would like to talk about Enoch, because he is the great grandson of Adam, and he is the next one that walked with God. So God did not have that with Adam and Eve, but he had that with Enoch. And it says in Genesis 5:22, "And Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah, and he had sons and daughters." So Enoch was a special person. Um, all the days of Enoch were 365 years, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. And that is such a cool verse. I love the way that that's phrased. He was not, for God took him. So anyway, he lived a year of, like, our year of 365 days, he lived years. So that's significant, and I'll point that out in just a bit. But anyway, um, his his grandson Noah will be where that'll I'll pick up with that. But the next patriarch I'd like to talk about is Methuselah. And he was a special character because he was the oldest man that ever lived, 969 years. None of the patriarchs lived to be 1,000 years old. They all fell short of 1,000. And anyway, he actually lived 5 years longer than his son Lamech. So that's pretty neat. But what is significant about him, he did know the six other um, pre flood patriarchs, and his name has death in it. The name Methuselah means when he dies, it will come. And of course, that's referring to the flood. When he dies, it will come. There are some scholars who think he drowned in the flood, but I don't think so. I think he was a righteous man. He had Lamech, and um, he lived after the death of Lamech, like I said, 5 years. Um, and that's the next patriarch I want to talk about, Lamech. And he is special because all these different patriarchs are living a certain amount of years. Nothing in particular sticks out to you except that they live so long. But Lamech lives 777 years. Here we go with all the sevens again. And Lamech is, of course, the son of Methuselah. And he named his son Noah, who was the seventh patriarch in the line of Christ. And he gave Noah the name of Rest, which, if you go back to Genesis 2:3, God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it because in it, God, rested from all of his work. So they are saying of Noah, this is Genesis 5:29, and Lamech called the name of his name Noah, and this same one, shall comfort us concerning our work and toil of our hands because of the ground which the Lord hath cursed. So anyway, Lamech dies, and he is buried by his father and his son. If you do the math, you realize that Methuselah is still around, and he and Noah bury their father, their son, and then Methuselah lives 5 years longer. Anyway, the next one that I wanted to talk about is Noah. And Noah is the first man that is in our narrative that is born after Adam dies. And he actually has the distinction of living 20 years longer than Adam. I mean, Adam's gone, and Adam lived to be, I think, 930. Noah lives to be 950. So, like his great grandfather Enoch, Noah walked with God. So he has that special distinction. And like Enoch, also, he lived exactly 1 year on the ark that God had him build. Because I always figured it was around a year. But I did the math. I read diligently through all the passages and counted it up, and it was exactly 1 year. So the numbers are very special, the way that God is such a God of order. And that is what I think the Lord wants us to think about. And Noah also has the distinction of having built the very first altar. So after, this year-long trek on an ark and floating above the mountains, Noah opens a window, and then, he finally is allowed to get off the ark, and he sacrifices animals, which you have to think that they were very precious then because there weren't very many left. Humans and animals, only what was safe inside that ark lived. Everything else on the whole wide world was dead. That's why we have fossils everywhere. So that's why we don't believe the evolutionists, because they're all washed up. Sounds good, doesn't it? From the flood, they were all washed up. Anyway, we'll go on to Shem. He would be the next one that I wanted to talk about in Genesis 5:32. Shem was born to Noah at 500. Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, the Bible doesn't always put sons in order, but when one of them is more important, they're listed first. And this is the case. And that's like Moses and Aaron. Moses is younger, listed first. Anyway, because it says in 10:25, it refers to Japheth as the elder. And then in Genesis 9:24, with Noah and that fiasco, it says, when Noah woke and knew what his youngest son had done unto him, which we really don't know what happened, but it wasn't good. And he cursed Canaan, who was the son of Ham, and told him he would be a servant of servants. So anyway, this brings about a very exciting bit of trivia that I've never heard anyone mention before. But if it says in Genesis 11:10, Shem was 100 years old and begat Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. This would mean he was 98 years old during the flood. So in 10:22, Arphaxad is the third son of the 5 sons born. And then and this is also backed up in Chronicles, 1 Chronicles 1:17. And that means that his wife had to be pregnant on the ark with Elam. So that's pretty cool. I mean, you kind of figure it, but according to the math here, that would be the case. Because there's no way that Arphaxad, born 2 years after the flood, and he's the third son, not unless she had triplets. Anyway, so we're going to go on to Terah, and he is the father of Abraham. And there's something very different about Terah. He is the only patriarch that does not live after his son is born. All of the other ones, it says, like I'm just looking at Enoch. And Enoch lived 65 years and begot Methuselah. And Enoch walked with God. And it says, and Enoch lived after that. The word lived and Terah are not mentioned together. So Terah, I don't think he was a believer. Anyway, Genesis 11:26 says, and Terah lived 70 years and begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And they are not triplets. we know that Abram was not the oldest because in verse 29, he and Nahor took daughters of Haran who had to be older. They took Milcah and Ishka. Ishka is another name for Sarah. So that makes Lot a brother to Sarah. Anyway, Terah is the first patriarch to die without having lived. And I don't know if this is true or not, but if you look him up in the Strong's Concordance, the very next word after Terah, and we do know that he was an idol worshiper because of a verse that we find in the book of Joshua when he talked about the fathers on the other side of the flood, that they worshipped idols. And of course, Terah did worship idols. The next word in the Strong's is teraphim. So I don't know if it's a fact, but if you add a couple letters to his name, to the name Terah, you have teraphim. So anyway, I don't think that's good. Anyway, the next this will be the ninth patriarch that I want to talk about, and that would be Abram or Abraham. His name was changed, and he is a multifarious character. Abram was a father, he was a husband, he was a type of Christ, he was a kinsman redeemer to Israel, he was a father of all nations, he was a stranger and pilgrim in the earth, he was a mighty prince among the heathen, he was a prophet, he was a patriarch, and lastly, he was a polygamist. In fact, Abraham was a polygamist. Isaac was not, and Jacob was a polygamist. So Isaac is sandwiched between two polygamists. So anyway, Abraham, I mean, we talk about Abraham's bosom in the New Testament, being the father of all, and the blessings came through him and through his seed, especially through his son Isaac. But anyway, he was the father of 8 sons, and he lived a very long time not knowing or really not thinking that he was going to have any children. But, God told him that he would have a son. And that was, of course, before Sarah said, hey, go sleep with the maid. And he didn't have a problem with that. And you don't notice that he consulted God before he bedded the maid. And Hagar, I feel very sorry for her. I just feel like she was used. I mean, she was a servant girl, but she kind of got a raw deal because Abraham took her like a wife, but then he abdicated his role as protector when he allowed Sarah to have at it with her. And of course, Sarah kicked her out. So anyway, back to Abraham. He lived in the land 100 years because in 12:4, when he left Haran, which was, of course, named for his brother, he was 75 years old. And then in 25:7, he is 75, which means 175 years. And if you do the math, he lived in the land 100 years. And then, of course, at the age 99, he had his name changed and he was circumcised. And when God changed his name, Abraham's name, he actually breathed life into him. And you can't say the name of Abraham without exhaling. he breathed the breath of God into him, and that is the ruach, the spirit. And so you can say Abram and then say Abraham, and it's the AH in there. And also with Sarah, it was Sarai, and Sarai means argumentative. And I have a mind that she probably was a bitter person, but she also had the breath of God breathed into her name, and it turned her into a princess. Anyway, I just think that's very neat the way God changed names. There were quite a few people that had their names changed in the Bible. Excuse me. My throat gets dry sometimes. Anyway, so my 10th character, of course, would be Sarah. And she is the only woman in the Bible whose age is given at death. She was 127 years old. So she died. And interestingly enough, I think she died alone. And I think that could have been from unbelief, because God had told Abraham that he was going to be a father, and Abraham laughed also. But I don't think Abraham laughed in disbelief, because God had told Abraham in Genesis 17:19 and then in verse 21 that a child would be born, and he names him Isaac. He gives the name to Abraham. And you can't tell me that Abraham would not have passed that information on to his wife. Guess what, honey? The Lord told me you're going to have a baby and we're going to name him Isaac. So it's not just, saying it, it's speaking the name of the child, which makes it more concrete. So anyway, in verse 12 of chapter 17, she laughs in unbelief, and then she lies about it. She says, "Oh, but I didn't." And then the Lord, who's there with two other angels, says, "Oh, but you did," because God knows everything. But anyway, it says that Abraham planted a grove in the area of Beersheba, and he lived in the land of the Philistines many days. And when in verse 34, but when it talks about the Philistines, that's actually an acronym, an anachronism, which means that is information that is chronologically out of order, because the Philistines don't actually appear until after the conquest of Joshua. So after the book of Joshua, you'll read about the Philistines. So there really wasn't a land of Philistines, or at least named yet. It shouldn't have been named in the book of Genesis, but that's not a big deal. Anyway, I think that Abraham left Sarah because in chapter 25, he took Keturah and he had 6 more sons with her. And the second son, Jocham, had Sheba and Dedan, and then Dedan had 3 sons. So Abraham and Keturah actually became grandparents to these, and then great grandparents. So Sarah never saw her grandchildren. She saw her son, but she never saw his children or his children's children. And something else interesting that I picked up on, and that is that a little later on, I'm just going to get to Isaac in a minute. Isaac loved Rebekah, And that is the first time that the word love appears in the Bible, but it never says that Abraham loved Sarah. Jacob loved Rachel and he loved Joseph, but never said of Sarah. And I have to wonder if maybe she is punished by God because she dies alone. She is in Hebron when she dies, and that's in chapter 23, I think. Yes, and the death of Sarah, 23. And Sarah was 120 years old, 107 and 20 years old, and these were the years of the life of Sarah. And she died in Kirjath Arba, which is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. So he came to her. He was not with her. He is with Keturah, who is a more fertile woman, because when God healed Abraham and Sarah of their infertility, Sarah didn't have any more children, but Abraham sure did, because he went on over to a younger woman and quickly produced 6 more sons. So anyway, it's interesting to me that Sarah dies alone because Isaac isn't with her either. After Abraham and Isaac go up to Mount Moriah, when God tells him to sacrifice his son, Isaac doesn't come back. Isaac does not appear in the narrative again until Rebecca is found as a wife. And it's very interesting that Sarah probably did not see him again after that. And I think she died a bitter old woman. I find it hard to forget how nasty she was to Hagar. But anyway, God still had her mentioned in the book of Hebrews in the Hall of Fame. So she is one of the few women that is listed there. Anyway, so that's Sarah. And then I wanted to go on to Isaac, who was the child of promise. And Isaac is mentioned in Genesis 27. Isaac was born to two very elderly parents, the only child of Sarah, of course. Doesn't say a whole lot about him. Like I said, he was not a polygamist like his father and his sons. Anyway, when Rebecca is pregnant with twins, and she inquires to God as to why, God tells her that there are 2 nations in her womb. And I'll read that to you. And that is found in Genesis 25:22. Whenever it's verse 22, it's special because there are 22 characters in the Hebrew alphabet. So always pay attention when it's a 7 or 22, or actually any multiple of 7. But it says, and this is Rebecca, who had twin babies for an anniversary gift, I think. It says, and because Isaac had entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. In verse 22 now. And the children struggled together within her, and she said, if it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord. She was godly. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and two manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels, from thy body, and the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. And so Isaac knew this. And when the two children are born, Esau's the older, Jacob the younger. And Isaac um, cares the most for Esau. Rebecca loves Jacob. Well, when in chapter 26, actually, I'm sorry, prior to that, into 25, Isaac, against God's words, wants to bless Esau. So he tells his oldest son, to go out in the field and get venison, because whenever they did this blessing, it involved food. And he wanted this savory meat that Esau knew how to make. Well, it says that his eyes were dim. And if you look the word up in the Strongs, he was not only blind physically, but spiritually as well. And he is about 100 years old here. And what he is about to do, we know, goes contrary to God's spoken word. And I'm not sure why he tries to do this, but he actually lives 80 more years after he's saying, I'm old now and I don't know the day of my death. This is found in chapter 27. And it came to pass that when Isaac was old and his eyes were dim, and that's the word that I looked up about being physically and spiritually dim, so that he could not see. And he called Esau, his eldest son, and said to him, my son. And he said, behold, here am I. And then he says, I know not the day of my death. Well, he's really off there because he's going to live 80 more years. Anyway, Rebecca overhears this and tells Jacob what to do. And that creates another big problem. But anyway, Isaac is doing wrong here, because when Rebecca hears this, and she must be a pretty good cook, and I'm not sure how she's, kept the smell away from her husband, that he wouldn't smell the smells of the goats that she told Jacob to go get. But he was obviously fooled, because he blessed, in his eyes, the wrong son. Anyway, it's very interesting that he calls Esau my son a lot of times, and Isaac never calls Jacob my son. Never one time. Not in all the places I looked, never one time. But the word son is mentioned 25 times, and 14 times he calls Esau my son, 9 more times with deception, because he's calling Jacob my son, but he thinks he's calling Esau his son. Rebecca says, my son Jacob, 7 times. But anyway, that was interesting. All the times the word son came up. But anyway, after he blesses Jacob, who is wearing the sheepskin and all, and smells of the field because he's in Esau's clothing, and he has scarcely gone from the room when Esau comes in with the savory meat that Esau loved. I'm sorry, that Isaac loved. Um, and Isaac realizes his mistake. It said that he trembled exceedingly, actually, very exceedingly. And I think that that's because he realized that he was trying to thwart God, and he was doing wrong. And ironically, Isaac disappears from the narrative for 7 chapters, and he lives, like I said, 80 more years. And he is only mentioned in 3 verses at the end of chapter 35. And Esau begs, pleads with crying, strong crying and tears, begs for blessing. And he is not given a blessing, not what he wants. And the word blessed and Esau are not in the same verse. Not until Hebrews, there it says that Isaac in faith blessed Isaac, Jacob, and Esau, but it's not singly applied to Esau because God said, Jacob have I loved and Esau have I hated. So that was very interesting to me as well. Number 12, and the final person that I was examining with my Genesis trivia, Rebecca. And she was, of course, family of Abraham and Sarah. But Abraham sends Eliezer, the oldest servant of his house, and the name isn't actually given, and this is in Genesis 24. Doesn't actually give the name of Eliezer, but we know that from previous, I think maybe chapter 15. But he says, and Abraham, speaking of his son Isaac, he calls him my son quite a few times. I think like 8 times. Anyway, he says, go to Mesopotamia and get my son a wife. And what is very interesting about this, Eliezer, who has control of all of his master's goods, he takes 10 camels. He takes a lot of gifts, expensive things. And they travel about 400 miles. And I was fascinated with the camels because it says that a camel can go 100 miles without getting a drink of water. And so if they're traveling 400 miles, they've had to stop a few times. But you figure by the time that they get northward to Mesopotamia, they're probably pretty thirsty. And Eliezer kind of had this deal with God that the woman that he goes to and asks for a drink, that she would say, and I will water your camels also. I think that's mentioned like 5 times. And he meets with Rebecca as a bride for Isaac, and she is very beautiful and a virgin. And anyway, she says that to him. She says, yes, sir, I will give you a drink and let me water your camels also. And for a young girl with a pitcher, I just think that that is a phenomenon, because I read that a thirsty camel, just one camel, and remember that he took 10 camels, that one camel can drink like 30 to 40 gallons of water in 10 minutes. So she really would have had to hustle to water 10 camels. I mean, they would have been sucking that water up so fast. I can't imagine how long that would have taken her just to do that. But anyway, I just uh, thought I would end there, that, that a camel could drink 30 to 40 gallons. I just can't imagine, um, that she did that all by herself. I was thinking maybe the Lord helped her. Maybe he uh, did some special, I don't know, something special for her. But I think that he must have really helped her, because he wanted that to occur, and she was the one that had been picked out for him. But anyway, this is going to curtail my trivia on Genesis. I hope that you enjoyed it. And I love reading scripture. I love finding facts and things that you don't glean unless you read carefully and deeply. So if you do like my videos and want to keep them coming, please click the like below and consider following me here on Facebook, or actually YouTube video. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Take care and God bless.